So thank you in advance if you've managed to bear with me for the third video. I know I'm not the most exciting YouTuber out there, and no special effects or anything, but I do thank you if you have watched the previous two videos. Anyway, I've got to the point where I'm talking about the media and feminism, and how feminism is clearly given a disproportionate platform in the media in relation to the support it actually gets. And that, I'm not one to sort of come up with conspiracy theories, but there's something not right about that. When you consider that feminism, I cannot look at the press, the print press, on a daily basis without at least one report clearly pandering to feminism about privileged men and yet another women's rights issue. Now, if that was balanced out with covering men's rights issues as well, I wouldn't have a problem. I actually phoned up the BBC recently to complain about this. Now, the girl who answered was very polite. She took my views on board. At least she said she did, and I don't know whether they'll take it seriously or not, but I had to do that because there is a constant pandering in the media to feminism. And I don't know whether this is because media executives are concerned about being targeted by the feminist movement if they don't cover feminist issues, or if it's simply the fact that there are feminists who happen to dominate media positions. But clearly there's something going on. This also applies to government, and it is completely disproportionate to the support that feminism actually has. I'm not saying that those issues shouldn't be covered at all. I'm not even saying I would support the right for feminists to have their view in the media. The problem is they seem to have the only platform, and anyone who dares disagree with them will automatically find themselves demonized. And you will have misleading headlines like such and such a celebrity dares to question feminism, and is worded in such a way as to make that person, especially if they're a man, look like a misogynist. Now, a caveat to that is there is genuine misogyny out there. I'm not disputing that. But the problem is we have got to a point where this movement is so divisive that it's actually got to a point now whereby if you question it, you're automatically branded by the media as being against women's rights, and that's something I absolutely detest. I detest the narrowness of the argument that unless you subscribe to this movement, then you don't believe in equality. I hate that. I hate that idea because I know for a fact that I do believe in women's rights. And I hate the narrowness of that sort of thinking. Now, the BBC, even when on the extremely rare occasion that they have covered men's issues, there was a report, 10-minute report. Sorry, it wasn't the BBC, it was Channel 4, but chalk and cheese. Most of the media is guilty of this. When Channel 4 did make a segment on men's rights, it ended up being dominated about a debate about respect for women. So there's no level playing field whatsoever in terms of men's issues being covered. None whatsoever. I'm not saying they're never covered, but the proportion that they are covered is almost non-existent, and that applies to the print press as well. It's not universal, but it is very widespread. So clearly feminism has a very, very powerful influence on the media, and that's something that really needs to be scrutinised. Whether it is lobby groups or the fact that anyone who questioned it is slandered, especially, if a male politician was to question feminism, his career would be over, or at the very least he would find himself slandered on a daily basis by the feminist driven media. A few more issues I'd like to cover. There is a lot of issues here, so thank you for bearing with me, but I do believe there is a lot of issues. Constant hypocrisy and double standards in the movement. Now, I've already talked about how feminism does not care about men's issues, despite feminists saying till they're blue in the face that they do. The movement has yet to prove that it does. And I'll give you one example of hypocrisy and how they deal with things. Now, take the sort of attitude that if a promiscuous woman sleeps around, she is considered a slut. If a promiscuous man sleeps around, he's considered a stud. Now, most reasonable people would say, okay, that's unfair. It's unfair on women. And feminists condemn that as a double standard. Okay. Why is it then that if a drunk man and a drunk woman have sex, now bear in mind both parties are drunk, the man is a rapist, the woman is a victim. And I'm talking about situations where both parties are drunk. Feminists and the biased legal system, it is unquestionably biased towards women in many of these regards. Why is it then that the man is automatically considered a responsible adult, but the woman is infantilized? She is considered a child, not responsible for her own actions. So if two adults decide to be reckless and get ridiculously drunk, go home to the man's house, to her house, whatever, have sex, she regrets it the next day and accuses him of rape, he is considered a rapist even if he is also drunk. Now, if it's a situation where he is sober and he's taking advantage of her, okay, there's an argument to be made. But the problem is, if both parties are drunk, feminists can still consider him a rapist. That means they actually don't believe in equality of women either. That's something that needs to be talked about more. Feminists actually treat women like children, in the sense that they don't believe adult women are responsible for their own actions. So that's just one example of the blatant double standards within feminism. And going back to the media, look at how men are seen as disposable. Whenever there's a tragedy, how many times do we hear women and children were among the fatalities? Children, okay, I can understand, they have the rest of their life ahead of them. But the media still regards women victims as being more precious than male victims. So there's something seriously wrong with that. When we look at the atrocities of ISIS, now ISIS is a brutal organisation that terrorises everyone. But when you hear of men being massacred on scale, that does not get anywhere near the same coverage as if the victims were women. The same with other terrorist groups. When Boko Haram kidnapped the girls in Nigeria, and everyone agrees that was a terrible incident, only a complete idiot would dispute that. So I have no problem with that being covered. But why does that get more coverage than the 50 young men that Boko Haram massacred in their sleep? And there's many, many examples of this in the media. So feminism, for all its talk about equality, is absolutely epitomised by hypocrisy and double standards. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the focusing on trivial issues over major human rights violations. Now, in the initial video, I said that I'm not anti-feminist because I do believe there are specific women's issues in the world. There are serious human rights abuses of women in this world, and anti-feminists who say there aren't are deluded. There are. But the issue I take with Western feminists is, whilst they make videos like 10 hours of walking in New York City as a woman, and I've already made my views on that clear, why is it feminists consider something like that more important than, say, a woman in Pakistan or Afghanistan getting acid thrown in her face? And yes, I know there's men's issues in those countries as well, but there are serious human rights violations against women. So why is it Western feminists don't seem to focus on those issues anywhere near as much as they focus on things like the so-called objectification of women, something they obsess about? And I made another video about that, so I'm not going to talk at length about that issue. But when you look at the issues that feminists focus on, they're relatively trivial issues compared to some of the serious human rights abuses that are taking place against women around the world. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, women are brutalized in warfare. Earlier on I said frontline forces is overwhelming, the men are the victims, but when civilians are caught up in war, very often women are the victims, and in Central Africa that is a huge problem. So why do feminists not care about that? So clearly feminists need to get their priorities right. If they do really believe in women's rights, then they need to start getting their priorities right. Blaming men for the decisions made by women. Give one example of this. There was a while back there was a feminist commentator, Yasmin Brown. I think it was in the Independent newspaper. She had an entire article about women in high heels, and of course she ended up blaming men, because that's what feminists always do. Feminists actually patronize women by insinuating that they're not responsible for their own decisions. So if an adult woman chooses to wear high heels, oh, that's because the patriarchy demands it of her. Now, I cannot ever recall a time when I can think of a man pressuring his girlfriend to wear high heels. I cannot think of any example of that. So feminists will say, oh, society demands it. Rubbish. If a woman wears flat shoes, no one cares. Women choose to wear high heels because women think that high heels look elegant. So, this is an example of how feminists blame men for the decisions that women take. If a woman chooses to be a strip artist, oh, that's patriarchy, sexualizing her. Even though she has made the choice as an adult woman to become a strip artist. And okay, she might say it's a bad decision, but the fundamental point about that is it's still an independent decision that she has made. And yes, I know there is exploitation in the sex industry, I'm well aware of that, but in the end of the day, if you're going to talk about strong independent women, then you have to respect women's rights to be sovereign of themselves, including the right to make stupid decisions. Now if I do something stupid, let's just take an example. If I decide to go out and get drunk, and then I have a massive hangover the next day, I cannot blame anyone but myself. So, if a woman chooses to become a strip artist and she regrets it, then that's her responsibility. Yes, she might regret it. Yes, it might have been a mistake in her life, but I am so fed up of feminists blaming men for the decisions that adult women take. And I'm not talking about situations where women are, part of a sex trafficking gang where they're being trafficked or drugged or something like that. I'm talking about independent decisions. I mean, to obsess about high heels when there are women who are victims of acid attacks in the world is pathetic. And it just shows how utterly pathetic Western feminism has become. Finally, this is my final point, and I'm going to close up here because I know I've been talking at length. Feminism fundamentally is a divisive movement. If all the points that I've raised and tried to highlight don't show that, I don't know what will. Feminism, no matter what they say, is fundamentally about women versus men. Feminism is about female victimhood versus the myth of male privilege. In fact, both are myths, because there are many areas that women actually have a lot more safeguards than men. For example, when you look at parental custody, when you look at sentencing. When you look at issues like women's studies, feminism actually turns women into victims all the time by trying to encourage young women to believe that they are oppressed by this big overbearing patriarchy. Now, constantly stirring that up is dangerous because it actually inadvertently demonizes half of humanity. Feminists may say that they don't hate men, and that might be true for most individual feminists. Of course, male feminists will say, oh, how can I hate men? I am a man. But my message to male feminists is, okay, but you still endorse a movement that promotes division between men and women. Feminism is not an inclusive movement, despite what Emma Watson says, and actually he for she is not about including men, it's about asking men to be subservient, if you really look a bit deeper into it. Any movement that is divisive has to be questioned. And the very fact that feminists question why they should be questioned just shows that they should be questioned. Because that is a totalitarian mindset. The idea that feminism is above criticism. I came across an interesting meme earlier. It basically said, no movement in history that has supposedly good intentions has survived by putting itself in a position that thinks it is above scrutiny. That is precisely the problem with modern Western feminism. It's got so obnoxious and so arrogant that anyone who dares question it, not even criticize it, but even question it, is automatically silenced or branded a misogynist, or told to shut up, or in the case of women told that they're stupid or they're subservient to men. Feminism is by nature a divisive movement. Male feminists, in my opinion, turn a blind eye to men's issues. And they are guilty of endorsing a movement that is actually rather divisive, very divisive. Feminism doesn't tolerate different opinions. Feminism divides society. Feminism makes all women victims and makes all men oppressors. Now, I have tried to raise the issues that I believe are very relevant, and that's all I can do. I staunchly believe in equality, and I will always speak up for women's rights and men's rights. But I will not be badgered into calling myself a feminist.